I just want to put in record a quote that I read recently from Transparency International. It refers to the 2000 NIS reported that perceptions of legal corruption in Ireland, we were talking about, in Ireland are higher than perceptions of corruption prohibited in legislation. Legal corruption is facilitated when there are no barriers in place to curb undue influence over public policy making, prevent regulatory capture and ensure political accountability. It went on to say that legal corruption played a role in the poor regulation and weak oversight of financial institutions, which led to Ireland's banking crisis. The crisis has been described by a parliamentary committee as the greatest challenge to the state since it was founded in 1922. So, bearing that independent commentary in mind, I want to reflect on the finance bill and to ask the Minister what oversight is in place through your department to ensure value for money, transparency and accountability. You allocate massive amounts of money to places like Éireann O'Éireann and other states, semi-states like that, with very little or no accountability to this House. And I'm talking about forensic accounting, an examination and audit, and a teasing out by members of Parliament just exactly how that money is spent. I believe if you did it, you might get better value for money, you might get better services, and indeed, in relation to the school transport system, for example, you might get a better understanding of just why it's not as good as it should be, why it, like many other services, are still in the dark ages. So there's little or no accountability for all of the money you give the semi-states. There's little or no accountability. Every turn they're back looking for more money, but no one looks at the efficiency or the audit within the companies. The CNAG is very limited in terms of what he does with the money that he can examine, the spend that he can examine. For example, going through the House at the moment, the Water Services Bill, and I praise Catherine Murphy for putting down an amendment in relation to empowering the CNAG to examine their accounts and to report to the House and to have the Public Accounts Committee examine them. There was very little appetite for that amendment, and I'm hoping now that my own party and the government will ensure the safe passage of that amendment. They got €2.6 billion to the end of 2017. It's envisaged that the state will give them €1 billion a year and onwards. And alongside that, the commercial water charges that are being collected by them and the rates that they charge new for example, the traps at various fast food outlets. All of that will go into a pile of money that's not examined by the state, which is currently examined, not in a very efficient way, but currently examined by the auditor within local government. So if we're really serious about ensuring that the money for the finance bill that's contained in it for every single department, that we get transparency and accountability, then the changes that are necessary to bring this about needs to be driven not by the opposition, but it needs to be driven openly by the government. And it is my firm belief, Minister Donoghue, that if you did that, you would impose on them the same moral compass that you have, the same decency that you have, because that is what is lacking in relation to an awful lot of the organisations I'm speaking about. They feel that they have a right to do what they're doing. They feel that they've avoided the transparency that would have been imposed upon them if the political classes in this country had a mind to do so and were awake when legislation was being passed. So there's an awful lot riding on your shoulders. And you were there at the Public Accounts Committee, you were a member of it, and you saw how it can make agencies of the state and departments of the state account for themselves. And the only regret I have, looking back on my 10 years, is that when the various reports were made available to the line ministers, they by and large ignored them, or they paid lip service, or the very civil servants that you have to rely on to enforce the law just didn't bother. And that's essentially what happened to our banks. And it has all to do with the finance bill in terms of what you allocate to the banks. It has all to do with regulation. And there is no regulation. The central bank does not really examine in a forensic way the activities of the bank. In fact, there's almost a reluctance, moral suasion. You know, when you look back on the last 10 years, do you think any of them are capable of even understanding what that's about? I visited Capita recently on behalf of clients. I do so in relation to the banks as well. And I have to say, the hard-nosed disrespect and the manner in which they bludgeon their customers is just shocking. And that's not from the senior, older bankers. It's actually from the younger, the newer ones that are coming in. They have now been indoctrined into that very same culture that you spoke about today at the press conference. And I was there, and I believe your sincerity in dealing with it. But until such time, again, coming back to transparency and accountability, that you insist on every single bank having an ethical officer, someone that would oversee what's going on, be able to report directly to the central bank and to you, you will not get change. And the reason you won't get change, Minister, is it's not driven by ethics. It's not driven by a moral compass. What drives the bank is money. And as one senior person within Capita said to me recently about a client, go to your neighbours, your friends, your mother, your father, your community, the credit union. But what we want is money, money, money. Now, if that's the thinking that dominates within the bank in a culture that's been passed down to the next generation of bankers, you have a job on your hands. And I will support you in every way I can to see that culture broken, because that culture has broken the nation. It has broken families beyond repair. It has made their lives miserable. It has removed hope from their lives. And it has shown in the most awful way, without any shame on the banks, that they have no compassion, they have no humanity, and they have no decency. And they believe that they live in a state where this can go on. And I don't think there's any community in the country that wants that type of state, that wants that type of community. And they look for political leadership. And we haven't given that leadership for the last 10, 15 years, more. The central bank promised it in 2010, 2015. Charlie Weston wrote about it in 2009. Nothing. Nothing has happened. It is the same culture. And we have to break it. And we have to break it here within our own Oireachtas by ensuring that we do these things at committee and by being open and transparent ourselves. I want to move to the financial reporting. I have tried for years, through the Public Accounts Committee again, to ensure that the HSE and the Guards would have one single financial reporting system. I often asked you about it at the meetings. And they acknowledged again recently they still don't have it. So what gets counted gets done. Where you don't have an analysis, you don't know what's going on in your organisation. So you increased significantly the money that the health services get. But it's going into the same structure, the same old way of doing business. And I have to say that some of those senior people within the HSE that manage it are not fit for purpose. There's too many managers. And when you go to the front line, that's the band-aid that holds it all together. And by the time the money gets down to them, the services get so diluted that the citizen, the patient, suffers dramatically. And the same thing applies to the Guards. You can have all the agencies you want. You can have all of the oversight from those agencies as you want. If you don't break the culture that exists, you won't get them to recognise the fact that they actually are accountable. Be it guard or banker or politician, we are all accountable. And we, as leaders within our own communities and at national level, have to ensure through this Parliament that accountability is first and foremost, that the value for money flag flies over this property here, and that we're not afraid to root out the people that have caused such distress in the state. And that is why citizens will say to you, and I heard it said here tonight, don't pay your television licence and you'll get fined. That lone parent in court today was fined €120. Others were fined €350. And the banks, you know, look at these fines like a parking ticket. It's part of their business. That's what they do, and they get fined. And as one banker said to his own staff, what happens, they said, if something goes wrong? The banker said, oh, but sure, we'll pay the fine, and then you get on with your business. Now, he used much more clear language that I couldn't use in this House to his staff. That's what they think about it, and we have to change it. I tried in vain to convince the political system here in my own party as well that the Housing Finance Bill, Co-op Bill, was a runner, that it could be worked on. And I give it to you, Minister, you can have it, written by a very eminent person in terms of the legislation. Take it, work on it, change it. But for God's sake, stop what's happening in the courts. That has a huge cost to this state and to families and individuals. In the Masters Court 2 weeks ago, there was 138 cases listed from AIB. And you know what? The lawyers came in and had the most of them postponed to another date. So more hardship and trauma for the ones involved. And nowhere to turn. They have nowhere to turn. Because the banks have all the money. They have the power to deal with these people in a way that you would never expect in a country like ours. And yet it happens. And that's why I would ask you to ensure when you meet the banks that they stop the repossessions. Every one of them. Because what was not touched tonight was those cases in the tracker mortgage area that have been passed to vulture funds and where people now are threatened in terms of the loss of their homes. They're not being counted. Those figures that those bankers gave you have been massaged. And I don't think they're not capable of it, because at the hearings at the Finance Committee, that was the one single thing that came across. They believe an apology is sufficient, and once they apologise, hunker down, the storm will pass over. And I hope you don't let that happen. I hope you don't let it happen. I hope that you will speak to the Minister for Justice and that some form of arrangement through the Central Bank and the banks will be found to stop the repossessions of homes in this country, because the cost of not doing it to the state will be enormous. You will have to house them. They will displace the people in the housing market. The numbers on our housing list, 120,000, will grow significantly. And I'm not exaggerating this. I've heard these figures talked about at committee. I've heard them talk. So analyse it. Stop them when they say to you that they have 14,400 identified. Yes, they have. But they stopped a significant number of for not being identified. Your junior minister spoke to Mr. Kazan about this. He is an expert on it. He said, if you give me 5 minutes with every case in the bank, I'll tell you whether it should be impacted, whether it have been impacted or not. And he's never been asked. So I would say to you and the Taoiseach, bring Mr. Kazan in and have him explain to you the truth about what's going on in those banks. They went to the High Court, PTSB, and they lost. There are similar cases to that they took to the High Court, that they still refuse to declare as being impacted. So those families become homeless and your Minister Murphy has to deal with that as well. It's shocking. In the Registrar's Court, and we're paying for those as well through the estimates, the Registrar, in fairness to some of them, they will stop the banks from what they're doing. In the Registrar's Court in Kilkenny, Bank of Ireland had the biggest number in the recent case. And the manner in which they speak to the customers of the bank before the register is appalling. It shows no sense of decency, none whatsoever. And we're allowing this to go on in the courts. And I'm asking you again to please stop it. When I investigated the money for the support of the housing co-op bill, we discovered that in Europe there are ethical funds, anything up to 5 billion, and they were prepared to take a 25-year look at the various debt, take it from the bank, push it out over 25 years and take their profits on it in an ethical way. Now, Europe was the same, and America, when they travelled to America, they established that those funds are there and able to help. Will you not consider now taking that bill, examining the prospect of raising the money privately, and ensuring the bill at least has a stamp of approval from the state here through legislation, and save all of those people that are in the banks or in the courts being queued up to lose their homes? Now, you must have seen, and certainly members here have seen, adults crying at your table in the clinic. Adults, I've seen them in court break down and cry. I have seen one example of a court case that has gone on for 20 years. And I've been down in the court services, or in the High Court and in the Appeals Court, and I have to say, they'd want to pull up their socks. Because to see the way that they waste time in dealing with all those cases is just a further abuse of taxpayers' money. And the last thing I'm going to say to you, Minister, is in relation to the local government estimate. You have a local government estimate, and it's audited after the spend by the local government team. And I put it to you, there should be one Auditor General with a sufficient number of staff to examine all of the accounts that that office would be responsible for, including local government. Why should they be exempt from proper scrutiny? Yes, they're audited, but do they ever appear? Does each senior executive from any of the councils ever appear before the Public Accounts Committee? No, they don't. Is it easy to get a question answered on audit from local government? No, it isn't. And there are many, many cases like that local government audit picks up, parks, puts in a report, and it gathers dust. That's what happens. So every single party in this House has a responsibility, having examined the culture in the banks and the culture in departments and agencies, to act in a way that sends a very, very clear message. The past is the past, and the future is accountability, transparency, and a respect for this Parliament here that I have not seen for a long time, and I certainly haven't seen it from the banks. And you, Minister, have set a trend in terms of your desire to put this right. You certainly have my support. But remember, your language is soft towards that what is used in the boardrooms of these banks. And if the ECB, as Michael Noonan said, and I quoted him earlier on in 2013, have a role in relation to Bank of Ireland and the AIB, which you own, then you phone them tomorrow morning and you say to the ECB, please come in as someone who has no vested interest, except in regulation, and guide the central bank not to ask, but to tell them that they will have to comply with regulation, or else you will have to introduce a legislation to curtail their activities and change their culture.
Thank you very much, Deputy McGuinness.